अब ठीक है. Hello, everyone. So I'm Shivay, and I'm just waiting for the next couple of minutes. Until then, call your friends and invite them because again, today's presentation is going to be very exciting about open source development, how to get started with it, and what exactly do we mean by open source, and how can you get started. Because a lot of times this is probably one of the most commonly asked questions, that how do we get started to an open source project, or how shall we improve our skill sets to actually contribute to an open source. So all of that will be covered today in this topic. And you can also have a look at the Git and GitHub workshop that we took place, and also at how to participate and how to get started with hackathons, because for a lot of you this must be your first hackathon, and for a lot of people this might be the first time they might be using GitHub, or even like want to get started with open source, and that is what we are going to be covering in this entire presentation. So definitely call your friends, and we'll just get started in within the next minute. And also after the presentation, you can ask your questions on the YouTube live comments, and we'll be more than happy to answer all of your questions. And at the end of the talk, we'll be also having a very short Kahoot quiz based on the presentation. So definitely keep that in mind. Again, you'll be getting exclusive goodies from Coding Blocks if you manage to win the Kahoot quiz as well. So we'll start at 4:05 dot, and uh, yeah, I mean, I'm really excited for all of the people. So let's try to make the live chat really interactive, and do ask your questions. And it's already 4:05, so let's get started, guys. Okay, so the topic for today for the workshop is Introduction to Open Source 101. So this is your one stop for understanding what exactly is open source. We'll be covering what is the meaning of open source, what really inspires people to contribute to open source, what are the benefits, how to get started, especially for those people who don't have any idea on how to actually get started with open source. All of this will be covered today in this topic. Just to give a brief introduction about myself, I'm Shivai. I am currently a final year student in IP University. I have previously worked with Google's Codin as a mentor with TensorFlow. And then I've also worked with Google Summer of Code as a mentor with Jenkins project. I'm also Linux Open Source Summit Scholarship recipient. And I actually gave a talk with Sanskar on FOSS Asia. So it is a great experience over there as well. And I'm also Girl Script Summer of Code mentor. And I'm currently working as a head of product at Metvy, which is an AI-based networking platform. Now, this is sort of the schedule that we'll be covering up today. So it includes introduction to FOSS, that is free and open source software. We'll be stepping into how to contribute to open source communities, and what exactly is it to be a part of such communities. And obviously there will be perks, and at the end we'll just have a very frank question answer round where you can just ask all of questions, and I'll be more than happy to answer them. Now, what exactly is open source, right? And why is it known as open source? So open means that it's open to all, not just in terms of because of the visibility of the code, because or is it so we'll be covering all those topics as well, but it's mainly open in the way of it's open for everyone to collaborate. Anyone can come and give their opinions, anyone can come and contribute to the code, and that is why we say that it's an open source software. And open source, if we talk about in general terms, is not just related to software development, but it's a philosophy that involves redistribution of the of the ideas of the product, and not just a redistribution of the ideas, but also to the access to the end product as well. So it's not just limited to a software, but open source is viable in any form of life or any field of life, and you can implement open source anyway. So it's not just limited to a programming or to just code. So it's a philosophy in general, and it's something that is being incorporated in a lot of different ways. And Now we just talk about difference between an open source and a closed source software. So first, I would like to take an analogy between, say, something like working in a team at Microsoft, say on the Microsoft Office products, right? So just consider that there's a team of Microsoft developers, say 15 their entire team, and they are the ones who are working, who are developing, who are sort of figuring out the issues and fixing bugs, releasing out new features. Now we consider such something as an open source community, which has more than thousands and 10,000 people working across the globe together in a collaborative manner. And that is the main difference between an open source and a closed source software development. So in open source development, you'll be having interactions, you'll be developing along with people from all across the globe. But in something like a closed source software product, you'll be just working with a team of, say, 50 people. So that is the main reason where open source rarely climbs over the top as compared to closed source, because not only you're working with a wider variety of people, you're representing a global community. It's more prone to have better security and bug fixes, because there are so many people working and anyone can contribute to the open source project. So your closed source softwares are more vulnerable because there are less people to actually go and fix the bugs, to have check at whatever vulnerabilities that can be there. And open source is generally released as a developer community, where the all the releases are made after the contributions have been collected over time. But a closed source software is usually developed in isolation, and you just see a final version of what is going to be released. And now we come on to FOSS, right? So I've spoken right now about open source software, but what exactly is free and open source software? Does it mean that it's free of cost? But it's not actually free of cost. It can be free of cost, but there can be some paid softwares as well, which can be free, which can be part of the FOSS software. But the F, that is the free, really does mean that we have the freedom to use, we have the freedom to modify the particular software, and we also have the freedom to distribute it to as many people as we want. So that is the real essence of the free word that is being used in FOSS. So just try to keep that in mind as well, that it's not necessarily going to be free of cost, but it's mainly the freedom of using it, modifying it, and accessing it at any time. And that is what is the real essence of FOSS. And if you don't know about Linus Torvalds, he's probably the most famous person in the entire space of open source. He's the one, the brain behind the Git, which is a version control system. He's behind the Linux operating system. So he says that in real open source, you have the right to control your own destiny. And that really molds well with the philosophy of FOSS. That is, you in open source, you have the ability to code whatever you want, and you have access, you can use the softwares at whatever time, in whichever place, and you definitely have that entire freedom with you. And that is what is being meant by this quote by Linus Torvalds. Now there are a few criteria when we are trying to classify a particular software or particular idea as being open source. That, again, I've already covered a few points of these, but it has to be open in sense of that it's free of cost. It's open in terms of access, that it can be accessed by anyone, and it doesn't discriminate against anyone in terms of accessibility. It's open to be modified, that the source code is there and you can modify it according to your needs. And it's open for anyone, anywhere. You can access the entire code base, the software from any part of the world, and it doesn't discriminate, again, as I said, in terms of the access. And it is open for reuse. It's not like a one-time payment thing or like a one free trial version that you're getting, and it should be open for reusing it multiple times as you want and like when you want. And that is really the criteria for classifying a particular software or an idea as open sourced. Now, the main reason why people would want to embrace open source, or why would they want to try out getting into open source development is mainly because of these particular reasons. That as I've already said, the difference between open source and the closed source softwares, that quality and the reliability of the code is definitely much better in terms of the open source, because you have so many people working across the globe, probably the brightest minds in the industry working together to form this particular software. So definitely the code quality is something to look at. Again, it's more secure. So in terms of the security, the stability, it's much higher as compared to a closed source software. Then you have the adaptability based on the changes being requested by the people who are working on the open source project. It is freedom, and it is flexible to use in whatever sense you want, whatever changes you want to make. It's very flexible. And the main takeaway is the community, because you're interacting with more than 1,500, 2,000, 10,000 of people across the globe. You build a very strong community, and in the end the community is all that really matters, because the community helps you grow with one another. We already had a talk about the power of community by Paris from Microsoft. So you definitely can, I hope you can relate with that how important is community building is. And open source is all about building that sort of a community, and that is probably the main takeaway from becoming an open source developer. Now, I mean, some of the examples, as you can see, is, I mean, these are pretty limited. You have something like Git, LibreOffice, WordPress, and Mozilla. I mean, these are like probably the biggest softwares that are being used, or software-based companies which are being used by millions of people. And yeah, I mean, all of these are open source. You can go to their GitHub, GitLab, and actually have a look at their code base. You can contribute to these, all these different projects. And I mean, there's always a sense of achievement. For example, you work for a particular feature in Ubuntu, right? So it's going to be used by, say, millions of people, and you're able to make some new addition to this code. So I mean, you're creating very small update to this particular project, but it's being used by millions of people. So it's definitely something to boast about. And that is the power of open source, and how it really drives communities and people who are regularly contributing to open source. And now, this is a very basic open source development model. Now, if you're aware of the software development models, how we have something like a waterfall model and agile based model. So this is a very brief example of how the people working together in an open source organization are contributing and helping out one another. So you will have a bunch of volunteers working across the globe, who are tracking issues, who are solving who are adding new features, who are solving bugs. And there will be some people who have had a lot of experience. So they are usually the project leads or project maintainers, who can review the code from the volunteers. But usually the open source development model is a very flat architecture, because all the people together are working, and there's no such hierarchy apart from those people who have some control or command over the entire project. They are the ones who are project maintainers or leads. But even then, the difference between the volunteers and the project leads is not that much. So it's a very flat architecture in terms of the process of development. But even in case of an open source software, you will find the agile or your waterfall model of software development, those kind of software practices that you'll find in say startups or very big MNCs. You'll find that kind of environment in terms of the software development in an open source project as well. So if you are contributing to an open source project, then it's very likely that you're getting a first hand experience of working on a real life project, which is being directly implemented somewhere in a large MNC as well. And now, coming on to contribution, I've already spoken about the merits, why we should embrace. Again, it's probably just a repetition at this point of time, that you are getting real world software development experience that follows the most standard programming or software development practices as well. The biggest takeaway is the community bonding. You're getting exposure at an international level to new technologies, to new software development practices, and you get a real hand experience of testing your skills. And definitely the satisfaction part, as I've already mentioned the example for say VLC. Now VLC is a media streaming platform, and if you sort of develop a very small feature for it, and VLC is probably one of the most famous media streaming softwares there. And if your feature is being used by the people, then I don't think so there's any bigger satisfaction than as compared to if you worked with an closed source organization working on their some product, right? So that is why contributing to open source has a lot of merits, and this is probably the entire encapsulation of why contributing to open source is really important. Now stepping into the FOSS world, I guess like probably this is the most commonly asked question that, okay, Shiva, you told us about free and open source software, but how should we get started? So the next few minutes I would like to just add on to that, and we'll be discussing on how you can get started with open source development. Now there are certain prerequisites that you are definitely going to need. First is Git or any other different version control systems. If you don't know about version control systems and Git, you can again check out Gunika's workshop that took place a few days back on introduction to Git and GitHub. You need a version control system in mind, so it's probably better that you can start learning Git. So again, you can probably just go to guides.github.com and introduction to Git, which will give you a very brief idea on how to get started with Git as well, and you can move on from there onwards. And then you probably need to have a decent knowledge of a programming language. You don't need to be well versed in all the programming languages. Even if you know one particular language, you can get started with an open source project, and you can get started with the open source development. And you need to have a basic knowledge about your tech stack, because when you're going to be working on a project, there are going to be a lot of different APIs. There will be work on the front end, back end, database management. So even if, say, for example, you know Java, it's very important that you should at least know what are the different kind of libraries, how does the Java functionality work. Probably if you're having experience with Java, you can know about Android or Java Spring. I mean, again, this is a very brief example, but it's generally required that you do need to have at least knowledge of one programming language and a version control system, that is Git. And these are some of the prerequisites. And probably the $1 million question that probably a lot of you must be asking right now in the live stream as well is how to get started contributing to FOSS. A lot of people are usually very scared to ask this kind of question: how can we get started to open source development? And that is what we are going to be covering today. So the first and the easiest step is start by yourself. If you don't have a GitHub account, you just create a GitHub account and you just upload a project, whatever project that you have on GitHub. Whatever public repositories that you have on GitHub or any other platform, those are open source. And if you're contributing, if you're adding commits and you're adding features to a particular project that you want to create as an open source project, and that's exactly is open source. So, and for example, if your friends are also working on some project that is public and you are contributing to that project, again, that is open source. So that itself is an open source project that you're involved in. Now there are a couple of ideas in which you can really make your project shine. So what you need to do is that first you just have to create a project. You can create even a basic project. You don't have to be very shy about it or feel bad. Just create whatever you have in mind. uh, Open source it. Remove all the bad code that you think is not necessary. Have a very good readme, because if you don't provide a very good documentation about your project, then people are not going to be going to understand what exactly are you trying to say, or what exactly is the functionality of a project. This is sort of a to-do list that you can create. I'll discuss exactly what each of these things really means. So I've said that to get started, you can do it yourself. So these are a couple of features that you become the host of your own project, right? Now you can ask for help. For example, if there are some features that you're not able to work on yourself, you have been trying to work on it for quite some time, so you can always create an issue. So on GitHub, you must be knowing about issues and pull requests. So in the documentation that you create, it should be legible, and it should be good enough for people to actually understand your project, and so that they can come over and they understand the project, they start running it, and then you can create an issue for the particular bugs or feature requests that you have, and people can respond to those issues by creating pull requests and contributing to your project. Similarly, you can also respond to the issues created by other people, and you can you can also have a license. So basically, license in an open source project is what exactly does it mean is that each and every open source project is governed to a particular license. So what does license mean is that the license tells, okay, how is the particular open source project going to be distributed, and how can it be used by a person. So obviously, if something like an open source project that someone is now changing it and trying to monetize the project, uh, if that is strictly mentioned that it can't be done in an open source project under the license, then that's illegal. Because even though it's an open source project, then but even then there have to be certain kind of limits that can be put to the project and how the project is going to be handled. So that is why a license is really important. There are different kind of licenses. You must have heard about the MIT license, the Apache license. So you can have a look at licenses as well. You can provide a license, you can provide proper documentation. If you want to release the project open to the public, you can create regular releases. You'll find the releases a tag on GitHub as well. So project releases, which shows what are the new features, bugs fixed in each iteration of your software. So you can have that as well. You can create custom tests for to run on your project. Again, all of this really comes with practice. And so again, the most basic thing that you have to do right now to get started is create your own project, uh, show it to the public. And I'm not saying that you have to create each and every project to be public. It's not necessary to do that. If you feel that some kind of a project needs to be closed source, then it's all right, that's totally up to you. And obviously, if you are trying to make your code public, always do remember that don't share your passwords or API keys, because again, those are not to be shared with the public. uh, and probably why this topic is really important is hackathons and open source. Now, usually in a hackathon, you're given some themes which are usually related to a lot of social activities, or ways to actually make lives of people better through the implementation of your programming or whatever project that you're building. So it's very important that even hackathons have this kind of a feeling that you should be open sourcing your project, because you would want that people can come and contribute to your project. So hackathons and open source come handy with each other. And this shows an example of a project that has got more than 7940 stars, 79 folks. So again, some of your projects can definitely be beneficial, and you can provide documentation for such kind of a project that you're building right now in HackOn, and you can open source that, and you can share it with your friends if you feel that your project can be used by the masses. And there are a lot of different hackathon projects that have now turned into billion-dollar ideas, $1 million ideas, and which are also open source right now. So you can definitely have a correlation that since you're working for the entire week and duration of the hackathon, then you can always make your project open source. Now, till now, I've mainly talked about how you can get started with contributing to open source based on your personal experience on, or how you yourself are contributing to open source if you are creating public repositories or helping out your friends. But I guess the main essence really lies on how to get started with contributing to large organizations. And this is what we are going to be covering in the next few slides: how to get started with programming in very large organizations, and that's how we're going to do. So this is a process. You have to find an organization, you start interacting in that organization, and finally you get started with the coding process. So we'll be covering this in more depth. So first of all, the main criteria is how to find an organization where you would want to work. So there are two approaches to this. First is a top-down approach where you first learn your skills. You have clarity in mind. Okay, I'm skilled at JavaScript, so I want to choose an organization where I can work on the JavaScript based projects. So first you need to identify your skill set, what are the core values that you possess, and then you can choose an organization. And uh, the other approach is that you first approach the organization where you want to work, then you look at whatever projects that they have, and you learn the relevant skills, or if you already know the skills, then you can directly start contributing to a project. So these are like the base two approaches to actually get started by for identifying an organization. Now, how many organizations do you want to work with? That totally depends on you yourself. Some people are comfortable in working with one organization, sticking to that particular organization, and just contributing to that. Some people might be working with multiple organizations. That totally depends on you and how you can actually collaborate. And now, the thing is, what you have selected your skill set. You have selected, okay, I want to join this XYZ organization. So what does what is the path after choosing an organization? So this is the very basic three pillars that you have to incorporate after you join any organization. The first important step is to introduce yourself. Get started by getting to know the community. Usually a lot of the organizations might have a group chat, say on Slack, Gitter, or Zulip, or they might have a mailing list where you can get started by introducing yourself. Then you start looking for particular projects that are in tune with your tech stack, or if you like a particular project, and even if you don't know the tech stack, you can get started by learning, by taking help from the community, because usually the community members are very helpful and they always help out the new members, so you don't have to hesitate at all. I know it's like a very new experience for you as well, but again, there's no need for hesitation, because the entire organization is working together as a family. You can consider it to be a family where each and everyone is helping out one another. And you can find out the projects either on GitHub, GitLab, or whatever version control based system they're using to open source their projects. And once you have identified the organization, you have introduced yourself, you have got to know about the project, then you can get started by looking at the issues, if there are particular issues. So the basic step that what you want to carry out is that, obviously, when you find a particular project, say on GitHub, obviously you can't directly get started by typing in a code, or solving bugs. So it's very important that you first use the project itself, you first use the product yourself. You go through the entire documentation, you install the application on your system, you go through each and every different feature. If you find that there are some bugs, that you can report them yourself by creating an issue. If you find that there is already a bug, and if you feel that you can if you can solve it, you can ask the permission to grant you the issue to you, so that you can create a pull request and probably fix that particular issue. Now, each and every different organization has a different way in which you can treat the issues, or you have to contribute. In some, you can directly just create a pull request and solve the issue, and just tell that, okay, you have solved the particular issue. In some, there are ways in which the issues first given to a particular person who asks that if they want to work on it, and the people at working at the organization, they first wait for that particular person to work on it. They give proper time to actually work on it, and in some time you can just so again, it's very important to first identify the community rules, what are the rules and the code of conduct to be used in that particular organization, and how to get started contributing to that particular organization. So that depends on organization to organization, but this is the very basic way of getting to understand. So like an analogy that I would think of is, for example, if you don't know how to use WhatsApp, and I say that, okay, you have to change the way the double ticks work, you have to change the color to green. So if you don't know what exactly is the functionality of the double tick in WhatsApp, then obviously you cannot make any headway, right? So that is how you have to first get involved in understanding the project and understanding the product, and then you can get started by contributing the code. And it's not necessary that you have to make a breakthrough level feature. You can always get started by contributing to even to the basic documentation. If you find very silly errors, for example, some typos or some code that you feel is not necessary, even that is considered to be open source, and it's a great way to actually get started. So you don't have to make a very big feature in the first time that you are working on a project. So that should be not the case. You can get started with even a very small contribution, and people are always going to be appreciating even a small contribution. So that should be out of your mind, that you have to make something really big and impactful. uh, Now again, as I've said, that you have to filter out your matchup for the particular organization where you want to work based on your programming language preference, or at least for the project as well. And do avoid to take up something where you might not be able to contribute, or you don't have the requisite knowledge. So that is something to keep in mind. And yes, that's basically about the matchup filtering. And the thing is that you have to start right now, because you're never too late. You can always get started by creating a GitHub account, understanding the version control systems, and that is the main tip that I can possibly give. That is, just start now. And and this is the developer cycle that one follows while working in a closed while working in an open source community or project, is that you first find existing issues, or you create new ones if you run across any bugs or feature requests in a project. You fix the issue in some time, and you reach out to the community members or mentors for help if you are finding some kind of a difficulty, and then you just send a pull request. Again, this I've discussed just to give you a very brief idea of how the deepest level of interaction of particular project, how it's being done at the base level. And again, the thing is that even if you have some doubts after seeing, okay, you might see that certain people are contributing a lot to the project. You don't have to have any doubts regarding that. Even if you don't have to be a pro, even if you're solving very small bugs, small fixes, adding small features, even that is great. And you don't necessarily have to be from a CS background. Even if you have programming knowledge, even if you're based, say, of mechanical or any other branch, even then you can join the community. They don't have this kind of a like requirement that you need to have a computer science degree. You don't need to understand the entire code base. Even if you are working on a particular feature and you have gone through that particular feature, you don't need to understand the entire process, because usually in such kind of projects you'll find hundreds and thousands of lines of code. So if you try to understand each one of them, then just trying to understand the entire code base will take you a lot of time. And interact with the community as much as possible. Do take part in the discussions, because usually the discussions are a lot about the project, on how to carry forward the project, what is the architecture that needs to be followed. So that is always a very good thing to have regular conversation with the development team as well. Now, so, these are some of the very popular open source based projects that you can work on. So these are a lot of these take place around the globe, around the world, throughout the year. So possibly the most famous one of them is Google Server of Code, which is a 3-month long program where you work with probably the world's biggest organizations, which come under the umbrella of the Google Server of Code, and you work on their projects. Then there are some other ones as well. For example, Rails Girls Summer of Code Outreachy is for the underrepresented community. It's sort of an internship, an open source based program BOSS, which is a program, open source based program from Coding Blocks. Code Eat is from FOSS Asia. So, and Hacktoberfest is basically a 1 month long celebration of open source during the month of October, which is organized by GitHub and DigitalOcean, where you have to create pull requests in any public repositories, and you get a t-shirt from them. So it's a very old and running initiative where more than lakhs of people they contribute to Hacktoberfest. Again, all of these programs are meant to increase the entire idea behind open source, and they're quite exciting projects that you can work on in these programs. And these give you a very good taste of how to get started with to how to get started with open source. So something like GSOC, the applications just got over the last month, and there are like a lot of big organizations like Python, Julia, LibreOffice, all of these large open source based organizations which are coming up in these particular programs. So you can directly get started by interacting with them, and you can contribute to very large scale projects as well. So there might be times where you might have applied for these projects and you did not get selected. So it's not a thing to scoff about. You can always apply next year, and even if you don't get selected, you can continue to be a part of the organization and contribute to the projects, and then you can apply next time as well. So never, just don't give up after getting a failure. And the most of the time that you will be doing is going to be spent in your research work, studying about the various organizations, learning technologies, understanding code base, and you will be contributing to your open source projects. Now, as I've already said, that there are definitely perks to contributing to open source, and something like GSOC, you get a really large amount of awesome stipend, and then there are a lot of other like these projects, these programs where you get a lot of different goodies, and you possibly even land up with internships or full-time opportunity roles, and you get the experience of working on a real world project and getting to work on the kind of software development skills that you might not be able to work if you're working alone on a project. And you also get the opportunity to travel to various international conferences to talk about experiences. Now, possibly this the biggest takeaway is that all around the globe there are big companies, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and Linux, which welcome people from the open source community uh, who have contributed to open source, have contributed to say these programs like Google Summer of Code, and they organize workshops and conferences throughout the globe, and they always have these scholarships for people. They have a scholarship program, and they always tend to pick up those people who have contributed to open source, who have sort of interacted with the large communities that are present for these programs. So you can check out the Linux Foundation. You can check out their events. Obviously, right now, currently, most of the events are taking place online, but possibly after the lockdown gets over in most of the world, you can get the experience of traveling even for free. So usually they try to fund your entire trip. That is not just for the conference, so you can get to travel around the globe, sharing your experiences and even networking with more people. And again, if you have contributed to open source, it's not necessarily that recruiters are going to be going after you. Obviously, there are a lot of different startups like in India, for example, Grofers, Zomato, which if you have done some open source projects. But yes, you need to keep in mind that something like data structure and algorithms is also equally important. So you have to keep that in mind as well. And possibly this is the end of what we have discussed. So these are the main takeaways that we have learned about open source through our discussion. That the people working in open source project, they always share the same goal. That what are the current needs in the project and how they have to be met. So at the global level, there's a community interaction, and they come up with these ways to share the ideas on how exactly what are the objective of an open source project. Then there's a sharing of the work, where the tasks are broken into small pieces. All of the people are working together, and there's a real-time collaboration. People are mentoring, people are reviewing the code, and all of this is being done to share the work. And ultimately, the main takeaway is that your result is being available and accessible to the entire world, and it's always open to come up with suggestions for improvements, for bugs, and it is going to be shared through to the entire world in true open source style. Now, till now, for the past 40 minutes, we were talking about the merits of open source. I purposefully came up with this as last. Now, as I've already discussed with you, that a lot of times there might be case where you don't want to you don't want to open source your project. It's totally fine. It's up to you which projects you want to open source. But there are a certain there is a certain degree of some disadvantages associated with open source. So generally, you'll find that it's not very straightforward to use, and there is a learning curve associated to working with an open source project. Something like Microsoft Word, which is quite easy to use. But if, say, a small organization is working on an open source project, then definitely they might lack uh, the clarity in how they want the project to be demoed and how they want the project to be used. So there is a general learning curve associated with an open source project. Now, possibly one of the other biggest one is that since the open source projects are being used by people, they might have incompatibility issues with the operating system, with the hardware, because when we are working on a closed source software, we usually take in mind all the different operating systems that they can work on, all the different version of the systems or the hardware that can be taken off. That is usually taken care in the R&D, and this is something that is not looked upon a lot in open source projects, although it's improving. And the code quality could be bad at times, and the software quality assurance, that is the after once the project has been delivered, people are using it. So that is something that is not really transparent, although it's being improved upon. And that basically comes up with an end to the entire presentation. And you can connect with me on these social handles on Twitter, GitHub, and LinkedIn, and you can connect with me on my email as well. Now we'll be taking on some questions, so you can start dropping on your questions to the question answer on the live chat as well. And I'm more than happy to answer your questions. And you can always connect with me later and ask me any questions related to this. And we'll also have a Kahoot quiz where you can just ask. We have a very short quiz, and you can start on asking your questions now. For the next 10 minutes, I'll be more than happy to answer whatever questions that you might be having. And then we'll be having a very short Kahoot quiz as well. So I'm just waiting for the questions. If you have any questions in mind, you can please just ask. Obviously, I'll be sharing the presentation deck as well, and you'll be getting a certificate if you are attending this particular session. You'll be getting certificates as well. And I'm just finding out if there are any other questions. Um, okay. So one of the questions that I'm getting is, um, how can I choose the project? Okay, so as I've already discussed, that the project really depends upon yourself, how you want to contribute, what are the requirements that you have. You're possibly the best judge for yourself. It mainly really depends on how well you connect with the project. So that is why it's very important that you download the project, you work, you go through the features. If you feel that okay, you like the project and the technology stack is something that you can work with, or you're willing to learn the technology stack for a particular project, then just go ahead with it, because after some time you will be definitely comfortable in actually contributing. And so issues are usually something, so one of the questions is that we have to find issues by ourselves, or will we get them from someone. So the thing is that either if your friends, for example, if you're helping, trying to help out your friends, if they have like raised certain issues, they have shared that with you, you can contribute to those issues. Otherwise, a lot of the open source projects that you'll find online, they always have their issues listed, and if it's not been assigned to someone, you can directly start working on that issue if you feel like you can contribute to that issue. So sometimes people might reach out to you that if you want to solve. So even if you're working in a community, the community leaders or people there will possibly contact you for solving a bug or solving an issue. But you can always look out for issues, open issues yourself. There are a lot of public repositories that have open issues for quite some time now, and you can always get started by working on those. And okay, uh, so how to choose company for which we can contribute. Okay, so again, the organization or the company, as I've said, it really depends on the organization. You can join multiple organizations, and whichever you feel like connected, you can a very good way of actually understanding how you can contribute to different communities, or what are the different communities. You can go to the GSOC page, and you can go to the organizations page. Over there, you can also go to GSOC to the archive, because a lot of the world's largest organizations, they have and they have start joining their company, joining their Slack channels, their channels, and you can see, you can understand, okay, what is the community like. Some communities might be more active than others, so it totally depends on you, how whichever one is you're more comfortable with, you can just directly join that. And this another question is, what are the prerequisites for GSOC? So the main prerequisite, as I've already said, is again all of these factors, that you have to be always willing to learn. You need to have a good knowledge of Git, at least one programming language that you might be comfortable with. And these are probably, and if you have these qualities in mind, if you are contributing regularly, you have to interact with the community, you have to contribute regularly, you have to step forward and come up with new ideas, features, and that's probably going to cover all the requisites that you can have for GSOC. The next question I'm getting is, from which month can you start contributing for GSOC? Okay, so the GSOC timeline usually happens that the organizations are revealed during the month of February. The proposals are taken up during the month of March, and the coding period is from the month of May to September. But you are never too late, since the GSOC has already now, for this particular year, has now already gone by. Now the students are already being selected by the organizations, so it's better that you can even start right now. If you don't have any knowledge of particular tech stack, you can get started by learning a new language, new tech stack. If you're if you're interested in working with web development, if you're interested in some technologies, you can just start learning that. And in the meantime, you can also go through different projects, different open source projects. Again, on GitHub also, you will find the most start projects are usually open sourced, and you can surf through GitHub as well. And you can try to find out what organization works out for you, as I've already discussed with you. And that way you can, that's possibly the main takeaways that you have to have is, you have to be The next question is, as a first year student and currently learning Python, how can I get started contributing to open source? Okay, so that's great that within the first year you are trying to get started with open source. Um, since you're learning Python, you can, again, as I've said, look out for open issues, open projects. You can create your own projects, whatever Python projects that you're creating or whatever Python learning you're doing, just upload that to GitHub. just try to work on that. You can, again, that is open source in a way, and you can try to make projects with your friends and open source that, keep the code public, maintain that code. Probably it could happen that if your project is really good enough and people are start liking it, it can become into a very very large project. And so I guess you can look out for organizations, as I've already said. There are a lot of projects that are based on Python, and it's just understanding the project needs, and if you are able to get connected with the project, that's how you get contributed to any other project. Even if you're graduated, you can participate in some of the programs, but in Google Summer of Code, it's usually you have to be a student at university level at your beat, like either you have to be an undergrad or your postgrad or in a PhD. But if you're working, then you cannot apply to GSOC. But even if you're graduate, if you're working in a company, you can always contribute to open source, because the company might be having this kind of a thing that you cannot work with some other organization. So that doesn't count in open source, because open source is usually like you're just doing some freelancing project work, and that really doesn't come under the rules according to a company. So even if you are working in a full-time job, you can contribute to open source. So Akhil, you can apply for GSOC, so you can be student twice, and after that you cannot, you'll not be eligible to be part of GSOC, but you can apply as many times. But if you get selected twice and you complete the program, then the limit is two times. And now one of the question is, I got this question was, what are the prerequisites before doing open source? Because I just know the basics of Java. Even if you just know the basics of Java, even then it's not an issue. There are lot of different Java based projects out there. Now, usually Okay. So one of the questions was that, again, the thing is that according to the project needs, you need to also have experience with uh, the other projects. So even if you just have a particular knowledge about a particular project, then you can always get started with learning other projects as well, or the other programming languages that might be, or the other technologies. So that's what you'll be learning while you're working with a project. So it's not really difficult to get started with that, because there are people who will definitely help you out. So yes, it's not really all about just one particular language. Obviously there will be a lot of different technologies that are with a part of a particular language, but it's always good to learn these technologies, because these technologies will help you out later in some other aspects as well. So you can definitely always try to get started even if you know a single language, and after that you will just have to learn the new technologies that are being used. And usually if you are well versed with most of the basic concepts of fundamentals of computer science, then learning these new technologies will not actually take you a lot of time. um, so one question is, are there any technical interview rounds? So I didn't get the question in context. So again, if you are joining a open source community and you're contributing, usually there is no technical interview as such. But the people working, they might just want to know, okay, in GSOC. So it actually depends on a, again, on a organization to organization basis. Some organizations you can directly just get started working with the projects, and you can start contributing the code, uh, while other organizations might take a small test based on your knowledge to sort of understand what exactly where you stand and which particular projects you can work on. So usually that's just to see your compatibility with a particular project and which project you should work on depending on your current knowledge base. But you can always improve yourself and contribute to other to other projects as well. So that is one thing to note, that there might be some technical round. Again, it's not a, sort of a technical round that you'll expect to have in jobs. So keep that thought away, that it's not a part of contributing to open source. But you might have some sort of a quiz in a few projects. So Lakshya is asking, please suggest some open source projects for C++ and Java. Okay, so for Java, I guess probably the biggest open source project that you can work on is Android. There is Apache. Apache has a lot of the Apache organization has a lot of open source projects based on Java. Then again, a lot of the organizations, for example, AWS, Microsoft, Google, they have a lot of projects that are based on C++ as well. But again, you just have to go and search for these projects, because the more you surf the internet and the more you interact with your friends who are already contributing, you will get to know about more such projects. But again, Lakshay, one of the best ways to get started is go to Google Summer of Code website, go to the all the different programs that I talked about, go to their organizations. All the organizations have usually listed their technology stack, their projects, and whichever project that you feel is something that you want to work on, in whether it's in C++ or any other language in that matter, it's good. You can get started with that. Question is, for how many projects you should apply in GSOC? So the maximum number of proposals that you can make is for 3 proposals in one GSOC, but it's usually recommended that you try to keep it 1 or 2, because you can think of it as that if you're trying to work on 3 different things at the same time, then if you can manage it, well and good. But for most people, if they just stick to 1 or 2 project ideas, that will be great. That should be good enough for you to get a good chance of actually cracking GSOC. Now, the next question that we are getting is, I have contributed to Microsoft organization, is going to be helping me in some way. Okay, so I probably didn't cover this point, but if you have a good profile, say on GitHub, if you're regularly contributing, there are people who might look out for you. If, for example, I recently just did my Google Code and mentorship with TensorFlow, and I got actually a couple of offers to become a book author for a TensorFlow book, and I got an opportunity for an internship. So it's very important that you are active on these platforms like GitHub, because people are always looking out for good projects, good project ideas. So if you're contributing to Microsoft organization, that's good. You can always have that on your resume as well, because as I've said, a lot of different companies are also they appreciate those people who are contributing. For example, a lot of startups like Zomato, Grofers, even Facebook. Again, if you have done open source contributions, they appreciate that, and that is a good way of getting started. The next question is, what are the different fields I can go for after learning Java? So Java is a very versatile language. You can go for application development, you can go for web development, you can go for Arduino and even electronics development, because even they are incorporate Java as in some way. So it totally depends on you. What is your preference? You want to go for something like a core software, like Windows based or Linux based system. You want to develop an application, web application. Again, you can literally do anything with Java. Java is a very versatile language. So it really depends on you. I've just told you like what you can do, and that should give you the answer. Can we add the contribution to open source projects in our CV? Well, definitely. Like whatever project that you're making, it's always welcome that you, if you feel like it's a good project and if you've worked hard on it, you can always add that to your CV. and and possibly if that project has got a lot of response, for example, if the project has been liked, it has been forked a lot of times, you can even mention that to sort of upskill your upskill your CV. So even that really works out. So even if your CV contains projects from persons, it's totally fine. You're more than welcome. And if anyone has any other questions, you can still ask. uh, I'll be taking questions for the next couple of minutes, and then we'll start with the Kahoot quiz. And apart from this, some of the other questions were that the Python notebook in operating in open source system. Well, yes, you'll find particular projects that incorporate the Python notebook. Even if you have some personal projects that you made in the Python notebook, you can open source them if you want, if that is the question that you're asking. And Jupyter itself is an open source organization which also takes part in, sometimes takes part in GSOC as well. So Jupyter itself is an open source organization. Okay, so the question from that I'm getting is, how early did you start coding? Okay, for myself, it was in class 6 to 7 that I started with Java, but I sort of lost track in the middle. Then it was mainly in my 11th grade that I really got started with C++ and in web development. So that's probably about me myself. Lakshya is asking, I'm in third year. I'm in a fourth. I'm in my third year. Whether to do DSLGO or open source. Okay, keeping everything else aside, DSLGO is something that you have to do daily. There's no looking. There's no sort of excuses for DSLGO. DSLGO is something that will not only improve your thinking, your analytical skills, but your basic programming efficiency as well. And DSLGO will directly be used in whatever projects you're making, because a lot of the projects you will be working on software you will be working on are possibly based on trees, or any other like standard data structure. So DSLGO is a big yes. And if you are able to manage time, then definitely, even if you're in your second, first, fourth, third year, you can contribute to open source. But you have to manage your time. You have to still give time to DSLGO, and you have to take out the rest of the time for contributing to open source. I'm in my fourth semester. Is it the right time to start competitive coding? Well, I mean, my advice would have been that you should have started it within your first year, within the first semester. But again, it's not saying that the word ASAP with a with a huge emphasis that you should get started with DSLGO as soon as possible, and competitive programming for that matter, because that only builds upon your analytical and your thinking skills. So the next question by Sarthak is, I have around 4 to 5 personal projects mainly related to web development in Node.js. When I go to contribute to major organizations, their code base seems to be very large. Okay, so I've already covered this in my talk. The thing is that you don't need to be you don't need to be scared by looking at their code base. The first step is to go and install their application or the software, or try to use that. And if you find you come across any bugs, you like to work on a particular feature, you can just go through that particular feature first, the code base for that particular feature. You can understand what is the flow. You can ask help from the mentors. You don't need to have the idea of the entire project, because it's virtually impossible. Even for the people who are working, they are usually working on some set particular features in their in that particular project. So you don't need to have the entire project idea in your mind. Like you don't need to go through the entire code base. You can start with a very small feature. You can go through that code and try to understand that. If you don't understand that, you can ask mentors for help. So it's not needed that you need to have the idea behind the entire code base. Now, next question is, I'm in first year and learning MLDS. Is it a good idea? Well, if you're learning machine learning and data structures, it's a good idea. Machine learning again has a lot of applications, and
I mean, yes, you're doing a great job, I guess, being in the first year. But using Java, how can I contribute to various open source organizations? Can you name some organizations? Okay, so I've already said that if, like, it doesn't depend on what language you're working with. Some of the great resources to get started to contributing to open source are the GSOC website. You can go through the archive. You can look at the organizations. You can search for the Java keyword. You'll find the organizations and you'll find the particular projects. Again, as I've said, FOSS Asia, Apache. These are like probably a lot of the big organizations that are incorporating Java in their open source based projects. The next question is, currently I'm in my first year. How should I get started with DS Algo? DS Algo is mainly about practice. To get started with the concepts, you can either go for online courses. Coding Blocks is a really great platform, or if you want to go for free courses, you can go for MIT-based, Stanford-based, Harvard-based courses, CS50 courses on Udemy, Udacity, YouTube, which are free of cost. You can go through them as well. And then once you are working on the core concepts, you can start practicing on sites like CodeChef, HackerRank, HackerEarth. You can always start with the beginner questions because obviously you might find it difficult to start directly coding a very difficult question. So it's always recommended that you start with with the basic concepts. So yes, you can go for online classes, offline classes, or if you don't feel like you want to take up classes, you can go for self study as well. Because even if you get some doubts, the community is very large. There'll be always someone to help you out. Now, one of the other questions that we have is that currently I'm in my first year. How should I? Okay, should I explore different domains or should I stick to one? Okay, this is a really unique question, a really good question that you are asking. Now, it totally depends on how you are able to work. So basically, if you have a very good knowledge about basic programming, it won't be very difficult for you to actually skip from one domain to another. It's usually just the coding, how it works, like the practice. So if you feel that you are comfortable working in different domains, for example, if you are good enough working with web development, or you can work at the same time in machine learning, or you can work in the same time in Android, you can definitely try it out, because since you're in college you have the liberty to try out different things, and it's usually recommended that you try out all the different technologies like blockchain, AR, VR. If you have interest in them, you can always try them out. And you can if you are able to manage both of them, then it's well and good. You can explore different domains. It's always good to explore. And if you feel you're not able to handle multiple things, then you can stick to the one with which you want to master. And what could be open source in data science? Okay, so there are a lot of different open source projects in data science. For example, right now, with the COVID, if you have, say, something like a COVID tracker, you could possibly make it an open source project. But usually in data science, you will find a lot of something. So the biggest example is TensorFlow, right? So TensorFlow is the largest possible machine learning or data science based project that is there. So other project ideas could be anything that you can think of. It could be some plant detection, or whatever you can think of, like some data analytics frameworks that might be open sourced. But which is better to go, Java or ML? Again, it depends on you. Both of them are very good fields in their own respect. If you have interest for machine learning, usually there's a bit of a learning curve, because you have to go through statistics, you have to go through mathematics, because you need to have a good idea of those topics, and obviously you have to have a good knowledge of algorithms as well if you want to go with machine learning. Java is something that is more approachable in terms of understanding the code base, but it totally depends on you if you want to go with either of them, because both of them have great great career paths if you want to go and settle with them. For ML, if does it require any requisite to get started, or we can simply start with the basic? So the requisite, as I've already said, is you need to have a decent amount of exposure to data structures, algorithms, and mathematics, and statistics, because most of the machine learning that you'll find, how the algorithms are also being written, they are incorporating some form of a mathematical function, or or yeah, I mean, like they are incorporating some statistical model as well. So that is some prerequisite that you might need. What to do after DS and algo? Okay, so DS algo
Once you get started DS algo, just continue practicing, and you can get started with projects. You can apply for companies, you can take part in programming contests, if that is like what you're looking to do after you have learned destruction. Linux is open source based operating system source, and we will be doing it on Linux based systems because for development it's usually recommended that over Windows you might want to use Linux. And a lot of the different open source platforms like LibreOffice, Docker, Kubernetes, they are much more optimized for Linux. So Linux is important, I would say, not just for the history of open source, but in general for programming as well. The next question is, how did you get the MLS shirt? Okay, basically, you can take part in MLS based hackathons, and that is how you get the MLS T-shirt. But you'll be getting really great T-shirts for HackOn as well. If you are regular and if you're answering the questions, you're going to get a very cool T-shirts from our sponsors and from the HackOn hackathon itself. Okay, so I look like it's look like something like that. I'm not getting any further questions. If you have any other further questions, we can take up for the next couple of minutes, and then we'll just start with the Kahoot quiz, because I know a lot of you might be excited for the Kahoot quiz as well. So just drop in your questions, and even after the call, you can always connect with me. And these are again my social handles. If you want to connect, you can just connect with me. So I guess I'm not getting any other questions. If you have any other questions, just ask them right now. We'll wait for the next couple of minutes, and then we'll get started with the Kahoot quiz. Mm, just trying to see if I can find any other questions that I might have missed. I guess most of them have been covered. But if you have any other questions, just ask. Okay. Yes. The presentation desk will be made available. I'll be sharing that within the Discord group. If anyone wants the presentation desk, you can just reach out to me and I'll share it with you. Uh, okay. So I guess we can get started with the code quiz. I'll be sharing the code quiz details with you. So this is the Kahoot quiz uh, pin. So it's 1754837. So just go to kahoot.it and enter this game pin, and once we reach around 40 people, we can just get started with the Kahoot quiz as well. Okay, so we have already started getting people. Again, do use unique names, because again, I'm really excited for people to join. So until then, in the meantime, when the people are joining, you can still ask questions from us. So the question is, how do you do coding in college? Okay, so in college it's mainly about again managing your time. You don't necessarily have to like leave, just attend college and leave everything else. It's important that you sort of manage between both of them. Even in college, you might get to know some basic concepts like data structures, algorithms, database management. Again, these are some topics that are really important, and you can, in the meantime, you can always like do online courses based on whatever interest that you have. So that's basically how I work in college and also do the code. Okay, the pin is 1754837. So we'll just wait for, I guess, since there were slightly less people. So let's keep the cap at 40 people. And once we get 40 people, we'll start the code quiz. It's a very small quiz, so it doesn't really matter. It's just 5 questions for you, and whoever wins will be getting cool t-shirts from Coding Blocks, sponsored by Coding Blocks. So definitely just attend. So we have got 24. Let's keep the cap at 40. And if there are certain issues regarding number of people, we can even start at 30. That's all right. So the Kahoot quiz game pin is 1754837. To join, you just have to type in kahoot.it, and you'll get started with the game pin. And the game pin is 1754837. So we have reached 26 players. Let's get started at 30. I guess 30 will be a good number. Um, One of the other question was how to work at DS at to be an expert. Okay, so again, the thing is, the basic idea is you need to be very regular in contributing to DS Algo. You have to solve questions on a day-to-day basis. It's like if you remember that in 11th and 12th when you were preparing for your JEE exams, it was like mathematics you had to practice every day. So in similar way, DS Algo is something that you should ideally do on a day-to-day basis, because it's like the basis of everything that you're going to be doing, whether it's development, whether it's pure software that you're making, or even like whatever you're doing, DS Algo is involved in some way or the other. So we have reached 28 pairs. We just wait for another couple of people, and then we'll get started with the workshop, with the code quiz. Again, it's kahoot.it, and the game pin is 1754837. Great. So let's just wait for the last person. Um, just after we get 30 people, we'll get started. Okay, so we have got 30 people. We've got more than 32 people. That's great. All of you can still continue to join. We are officially starting with the code quiz. Okay. So the first question is, who created Git? Is it Linus Torvalds, Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, or Tim Berners-Lee? You have 30 seconds to answer the question. Okay, so the majority of you were able to get that right. It's Linus Torvalds, who is also the founder, who is the man behind the Linux operating system as well. So let's get started. We have Suhadeep, who is leading the charts over here. Let's get to the next question. What is the full form of FOSS? That is free. I guess this is a quite easy question, so I would expect that most people will be giving correct answer for this one. Wow, 35 answers. That's great. Okay, so majority of you were able to answer this correctly, which is a free and open source software. So we have got a new lead, that's Rishabh. Now the next question is, what is the full form of VCS? Again, very simple question. Again, majority of you were able to get that correct. That is version control system. Something, the example is Git. And yeah, we'll move on to the next question. Which of these is an open source software? Again, majority of you were able to get that correct. LibreOffice is an open source project. So we have Dhruv now, who's on top. That's nice. This is the final question. What is the exclusive program for the underrepresented people in tech, which is an open source based program? Is it Outreachy, GSOC, Boss, that is by Coding Blocks, or Code Heat by FOSS Asia? Okay, so not people were able to get this correct, but Outreachy is specifically for the underrepresented people in tech. GSOC is a general program that is for all college students, and it's not just limited for the underrepresented people in tech. So I guess as I already mentioned that, so it is good. So the podium 408 at is Dhruv. Oh, she's first, and so you can take a screenshot of this, and our winner is Hawks. So congratulations, Sam, and you can take the screenshot and connect this on Telegram, and you can send your screenshot to Telegram, and you'll be getting prizes from Coding Box. So I guess few platforms on my Twitter, GitHub, and LinkedIn, and I guess that was it. Thank you for your questions. Really distinct and innovative questions from you all. I hope you like the presentation. And again, if you have any other queries, do ask them in Twitch or any other channel, and we'll be more than happy to answer those. And we are going to be having a lot more exciting workshops as well. So stay tuned for those as well. Thank you.